A girl once asked me if New Mexico was a new country south of the U.S. I told her it's literally one of the 50 states. She stared at me like I was lying and said, "Then why does it have Mexico in the name?" I said, "Because it's been called that for over 150 years. She nodded slowly and said, "So, they just let Mexico name one of our states?" I met a guy who thought Washington, D.C. was inside Washington State. When I told him they were on opposite sides of the country, he said, "Then why give them the same name?" I said, "Because one's named after George Washington." He said, "So they're both capitals?" I said, "No, just D.C." He said, "That's confusing. We should fix that." My cousin once said she wanted to drive to Hawaii someday. I told her it's an island in the Pacific Ocean. She said, "Yeah, but like, there's a bridge or something, right?" When I said there's not, she said, "Then how do people get there? Swim?" A friend genuinely thought Alaska was next to Hawaii. He said he saw it on a map and pointed right to the corner box that shows both states together. I told him those were just insets. He said, "Nah, the government just doesn't want us knowing they touch." Someone asked me where the state of Chicago was. I said, "It's not a state. It's a city in Illinois." They said, "Then what's Illinois?" I said, "A state." They said, "So Chicago owns Illinois?" I didn't even bother after that. I overheard a woman saying the Civil War was fought between America and England. When someone corrected her and said it was North versus South, she said, "Oh, right, I remember now. Texas won, didn't they?" A guy from California told me that Texas touches the Pacific Ocean. I said, "No, it doesn't. It's next to Mexico." He said, "Well, I've seen beaches in Texas." I said, "That's the Gulf of Mexico." He looked genuinely confused and said, "So it's not the same ocean?" A girl once told me she didn't believe Wyoming was real because no one ever goes there. I told her people live there. She said, "Okay, but have you ever met someone from Wyoming?" When I said no, she smirked and said, "Exactly." I was talking to someone who didn't believe that Alaska and Hawaii were states. He said, "Those are just vacation spots." When I told him they were the 49th and 50th states, he said, "So when did we add them?" I said, 1959. He said, "Huh, they really kept that quiet." A woman said she wanted to visit Mount Rushmore in Texas. I told her it's in South Dakota. She said, "Are you sure?" My cousin went there and said it was like near Dallas or something. I asked if maybe she meant a different mountain, and she said, "How many mountains have faces on them?" A classmate once said he didn't understand how time zones worked. When told that California and New York were in different ones, he said, "So does that mean they're like in different years?" A guy once asked me why Alaska is so cold if it's right next to Hawaii. I showed him the map inset and explained distance. He stared and said, "Maps lie." I knew it. Then he asked if people have to wear winter coats in Hawaii too because they're kinda neighbors. Someone asked me if the Mississippi River was in New York. I said it flows through the central U.S. They replied, "Then why do people in New York talk about it all the time?" I realized no reasoning would fix this. A woman said she thought Florida was an island. I explained it's a peninsula. She said, "Same thing. Surrounded by water, right?" I told her there's land connecting it. She said, "Then why hasn't someone cut it off?" A coworker asked if New England was a single state. When I said it's a region of 6 states, she said, "Oh, so it's like a mega state." I didn't even argue. She was convinced she'd discovered a new political unit. A guy asked if Texas is a country. I said, "No, it's a state." He said, "Then why does it have its own flag?" I told him some states just have flags. He paused and said, "So it's like a mini country in disguise?" Someone said they thought Route 66 was made up for a movie. I said it's real, running from Chicago to L.A. They said, "You can actually drive that far?" I nodded. They leaned back and said, "That's insane, like across the whole country insane." A friend asked why the Statue of Liberty faces east. I explained it faces the ocean. She said, "Then she's not even greeting America? That's rude." She paused and added, "Who's she waving to, Canada?" Someone said they thought the Midwest meant middle of the West Coast. When I explained it's central U.S., they said, Then why isn't it Mid-East? I tried not to roll my eyes. I once met a guy in Texas who swore Alaska couldn't be bigger than Texas. He said, "Everything's bigger in Texas. That's just science." When someone showed him a map, he stared at it and said, "Yeah, but that's not to scale." He genuinely thought the government made maps smaller just to disrespect Texas. A woman in a Florida airport asked how long the flight to the U.S. would take. The gate agent said, "Ma'am, you're in the U.S." She frowned, pointed to a map, and said, "No, that's the mainland. Florida's the island part." She wasn't joking. She thought the peninsula was detached. A college student wrote that the American Civil War was fought between America and the British for independence. When corrected, he argued, "Well, Lincoln was freeing the colonies, right?" He genuinely thought the Civil War and the Revolutionary War were the same thing, just a sequel. A girl in California didn't believe Hawaii was part of the U.S. She said, "Then why do people go there for international vacations?" Another kid added, "Yeah, don't you need a passport?" The teacher told them Hawaii became a state in 1959. They nodded and said, "So, New America then."